Welcome to the ins and outs of pickleball. Together with a very special guest, we will uncover the ins and outs of the paddle industry. Please welcome the founder of the PPL, Gary Brody. Woo.
Hi,
Gary,
Sam.
thanks so
Nice to
much.
be here. Nice
Yeah,
to be here.
yeah, it's going to be a good episode today. Gary, thanks so much for taking your time and being on our show. Before we dive into the world of the paddle industry, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the pickleball industry?
Sure. Okay. So, never even heard of pickleball in 2022. And towards the end of 2022, um, I was approached by people from who were investors in a Major League Pickleball team.
Wow.
And they were looking at the sport holistically and trying to figure out how this tremendously fast growing amateur sport could be a professional sport. So started talking with them, and it turned out that there was a problem, a technical problem with testing.
Okay.
And basically what was happening, and this is, 2022, really the birth or professional pickleball, I guess, was maybe 2 years old or 1 year old. It was just starting to pick up momentum. People were showing up with paddles that were various degrees of power, and there was no on-site power test.
Okay.
There's Joe. So basically, I was asked to look into this and to come up with a solution.
Okay.
And that was, in some ways, the birth of PPL.
Okay.
So we started out with on-site testing, and we found the educational institution, UMass Lowell, that did the study for baseball with cork bats.
Okay.
Guys, hold it down. I'm doing a podcast. So anyway, sorry about that, Sam. So anyway, the first thing I knew, the most important thing was to find the right people.
Right.
And through UMass Lowell, Dr. Patrick Drain, and he led me to Curtis Cruz, who was on the ASTM committee that set the standard for baseball to figure out how to measure BB core, the power of bats. And then, I actually, my first relationship was with the Bitskis, ADC, because I knew that we needed the right people.
Right.
We needed to come up with the right test, but we also needed the right equipment, and it didn't exist. So I remember my meeting in 2022 with Joe Bitsky and asking him, saying, hey, you helped Major League Baseball, you helped USO softball, amateur baseball with the cork bat, with the bats that are too powerful
Right.
to solve that problem. Can you do the same thing for pickleball? And he said, absolutely.
Wow.
And that was actually the first step, was to develop the right equipment, find the right people, and then create the tests, for the sport of pickleball.
Yeah.
So
That's a very nice origin story right there.
thanks.
Okay.
And we started out backwards because we didn't do certification in a lab. So
Okay.
we had to start out with what we were given and just doing on-site testing.
Right.
So I remember the first exercise that Curtis did was he took every paddle that's in play and he measured the deflection of every paddle. And Curtis wasn't involved in pickleball. He knew nothing about any of the paddles, which ones are too powerful, which ones weren't. It was purely a scientific exercise and research. He created a bell curve, and his premise was the top 5% of this bell curve of most powerful probably are the paddles we need to take a close look at.
Right.
And he came up with a bell curve. We ranked all the paddles. At that time, it was Brooks Wiley, who was the commissioner. He took a look at it. The board members took a look at it, and they said, yeah, this looks right. And then we went right into on-site testing. There was no UPAA. The lab wasn't built yet. We started out in some ways backwards,
Okay.
doing on-site testing.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So on-site testing is very limited as we know it, right? And it probably is a lot more limited in 2022. What were some struggles, hardships that you faced on on-site testing?
Well, as you could imagine, we just showed up,
Okay.
and professional pickleball and the paddle companies were in business, many of them for like since the 2015, 14, 16.
Right.
And then we came on the scene and like, who's Pickle Pro Labs? What are they doing? We test with USAP.
Right.
Just generally speaking, no one really, the paddle companies, the players, knew what we were doing.
Right.
And it took a while to explain and to have everyone believe that we're an independent third party lab and we're conducting tests that are based in research
Right.
and based in sound scientific principles that are useful. So it took us a while for people to really
Sure.
understand what we're doing.
Right.
It wasn't their fault; we were just new, and and that took a little while. So that was a challenge. You know, given the fact that pickleball is such a nascent stage and it's a baby in terms of sports, it's just starting. There are many challenges when you're starting something new. So I wasn't surprised with any of these hardships or challenges.
Right. So you guys built your reputation and you guys are doing an awesome job with that. Now let's talk about modern pickleball. Could you talk us about the different types of core technology in paddles?
Yeah, well, I mean, the simple, best known, I guess, classification of different types of paddles are like Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3.
Right. So could you
And,
tell us a little bit more about like what these gens means? Because we could have a Gen 7 in a couple of years. What's the
I,
difference between a Gen
and
2 and a Gen 3 or
it's a great question. And I'm not an engineer, but maybe I'm a good person to answer it because the way I understand it, um, it won't be too technical. There's a lot that goes on
right.
into making a pickleball paddle,
Right.
from materials to construction types to a lot of different factors could determine how powerful a paddle is, how much spin it generates, how durable it is. And I'm not going to answer the question like getting into the weeds. I'm not really the person
Right.
who should do that. It would be, the expert, subject matter experts that work at Pickle Pro Labs and do that every day.
Right.
But what I will tell you is that, the challenges that we've faced say a lot about the types of construction. So when I first got involved, everyone talked about delamination, which
Okay.
is basically the levels of the paddle material separating.
Right.
And that was referred to in relationship to like paddles that become too powerful, right?
Okay.
And then pretty shortly, people started to talk about crush core.
Okay.
And there was a perception that, you play with the paddle over a certain period of time and you do damage to the core. And think about it like a spring loading a spring
Okay.
that has, I mean, what I would refer to as beneficial break-in that becomes powerful over time.
Right.
So if you get certification on a brand new paddle and then you use it for 8 weeks, it's very possible that the trampoline effect of the face of the paddle has increased and
Right.
it's a more powerful paddle. Does that sound familiar to you, Sam?
Right. No, it's a lot of like the talk in paddles, like everybody's saying, "Oh, my paddle's D-land, my paddle's broken," all this stuff, and it's good that we can sit down and explain it to everybody.
Right. So, look, I'm not the expert to explain everything,
Right.
but I would tell you that the perception that some paddles, as you use it, become more powerful from use, that was true.
Right.
There were also examples, perhaps, of paddles that came from the factory with cores that were compressed and crushed. There are many different explanations for beneficial break-in.
Right.
And, we never set out to be a lab that teaches people how to make paddles.
Right.
Or
You guys
limits
test
people.
paddles. Certify them.
As long as you pass the test, our job is done. Or fail the test. That's our job.
Yep.
Is to set a standard, set a SOP for testing, share the information, and do the test. It's not about saying you cannot use certain materials. It's not about saying you cannot have a certain type of core, or you cannot use foam or glue, or, the cells have to be a certain minimum or maximum size.
Right.
It's just passing what's known as a dynamic test, a test for power. Okay, that's the exit velocity, that's our PEF, and then a test for spin, which is RPMs.
Right.
Now, I'm sure you've heard about the starret, right?
Right.
And the roughness of the face of the paddle.
Okay.
Well, before there was dynamic testing, the roughness of the face of the paddle was the primary test for spin. And all things being equal, a rougher paddle could have more spin than a paddle that's not as rough.
Right.
But there are many other factors that go into creating spin or RPM.
Right.
So rather than dissecting those factors and trying to determine them, we went right to the direct measurement of RPMs.
Okay.
And that's something that I believe has served UPA well, and served players and paddle companies well, that there is this direct method.
Okay.
And it's correlated, perfectly, because you're measuring spin. Spin is RPMs. I mean, there's no deflection is correlated with exit velocity. It's not exactly aligned. It's very closely aligned. But when we looked at the starret and grit and how closely it's aligned with RPM, we did not find as close of a relationship. So we knew that we needed to go right into measuring, RPM. Right. So, there are, and there have been breakthroughs in materials, trends in construction. This will continue. A big buzzword now is foam. Okay. And, with every technological advance or new materials, we have to look at our testing and make sure, are we still eliminating those paddles that are too powerful? Right. Or is our test still accurate and useful? And it's an ongoing, I don't want to say it's like a cat and mouse, but a paddle manufacturer's job is to make the highest performance paddle they can that passes the test. Right. Nothing's wrong with that, but it's a moving target. And, for us, we really have to, that's why I like the engineers to be on site, talking to players. You hear the buzz. What are the new paddles? What are people complaining about? How are we doing with the paddles we're eliminating? Are they the right paddles to eliminate? It's very important that what we do in the lab makes sense on the court.
Well, Gary, that's an awesome answer, but let's talk about the actual process of the test. What are the steps to getting a paddle certified?
Okay, well, the first thing you do is you register with UPAA. Okay. And then after you register and you pay for the testing, you send the paddles in to Pickle Pro Labs. Right. At Pickle Pro Labs, we condition the paddles, meaning they have to be for 48 hours. We put them in lab conditions, which is 72 degrees, 48% humidity. There's a narrow band of temperature and humidity. And after the paddle has been processed, we do the material measurements. Believe it or not, paddles fail because the total surface area can't be more than 24 inches. So we measure every paddle, very accurate. We have an accurate measuring box that measures them. And then after that, we'll do the deflection test, which is the on-site test. It's not a certification test per se, but we collect that data and we share that data because ultimately after a paddle is passes certification, it will still need to pass on-site testing for deflection.
Right.
So after we do the material measurements and the deflection test, we move on to dynamic testing. Right. And dynamic testing is basically 3 tests. One is PEF, which is the PB core test. It's measuring the trampoline effect of the paddle through the exit velocity. We have light gates. We have a ball that's shot out of a cannon, a performance cannon, and we could measure and accurately track where on the ball the paddle makes contact with it. And then, we collect data from the test that has many parameters built into it to take into account MOI, the weight of the paddle, many different attributes of the paddle. And also, very importantly, when we're doing dynamic testing, we do a lot of work. It takes a lot of time studying the ball and making sure that every ball by quadrant has the coefficient of restitution or the bounce we measure of the ball, or exit velocity rather, because a ball is colliding with the paddle. Right. And every ball in every area has different coefficients of restitution or exit velocity. Right. So it's called a ball correction factor. We come up with a ball correction factor based on the actual measurements of every quadrant of every ball. And we do things like that because that takes variability out of the test. Right. Everyone doesn't do that who does this test. The other important thing about our PEF test is that we have an inbound velocity of 50 miles an hour. Now, we didn't just pick 50 miles an hour. Right. Curtis Cruz and our engineers did a pretty detailed study on the damage to the ball and the efficiency of the collision at different speeds. Right. They determined that a reasonable speed that's measuring the trampoline effect of the ball and the true effect of a ball that's not damaged from excessive speed is 50 miles an hour, which is just about as fast as a very powerful drive would be, or a powerful serve. Right. Like you've probably hit serves at 50 miles an hour. And,
yeah.
And I don't know if you're the fastest serve on the tour. It's possible that a Deckle bar or someone else may have a faster serve. But you're right up. But you're right up there. 50 miles an hour should take into account for a pretty accurate collision of the ball and the paddle. So so we have that. We have all these parameters for the test to take variability out and to try to ensure that our test replicates court conditions as much as it can. We do our PEF, which is the exit velocity for power. Then we do the RPM test. That's the same cannon. Okay. And we have a phantom camera, very high speed camera. We put the paddle 30-degree angle, and we actually, there's software in the camera that measures the RPMs.
Right.
So that's the second dynamic test. The first one is PEF for power, RPMs for spin. And then our latest and newest test that is in many ways very important is our accelerated break-in test. Now, we started out with a manual break-in where we break a paddle in 20% with a very structured standard operating procedure and a vise. And we would take our PEF of the new paddle, then as we break it in increments, we watch how the PEF changes, or the exit velocity, through the break-in.
Right.
Then when we get to 20% break-in, there's a new maximum. So our PEF brand new is 0.385. And after break-in, it's 0.405. So as long as the paddle is within those ranges, new and broken in, it passes. Now, very exciting, development is we have an automated ABI machine.
Okay.
That's kind of like a roller that allows us to very accurately and incrementally break the paddle in.
Okay.
And this machine is, by the end of the year, we'll be using it for certification testing. And we believe that this machine will be a huge jump for the paddle industry with respect to conversations about durability.
Okay.
Because it's replicable, it's automated, and when our SOP is announced, every paddle company will have a uniform way to measure how the paddle changes over the useful life of the paddle, which I think consumers are very interested in. You're probably interested in. You don't want to shop with a paddle that's very different from match to match because you would have to, I assume, change your game, right?
Right.
For a pro, consistency is super important, right?
Right.
For anyone competing. So we're excited about that.
That's a nice change. Thanks for that explanation. That was a lot of information to take in. Hopefully our viewers all got that. Now, Gary, let's go way back, a couple years back. Can you tell us what was the first ever paddle certified by the PPL?
Well, it was the first one certified.
Yeah. If you
Our
get
first,
give me like
our
a
first, sure.
general
Yeah,
amount
yeah.
of paddles.
First time PPL did on-site testing was in Daytona.
Okay.
At Crotona, I think it's called.
Pictona.
Daytona, thank you.
Yeah.
And when we showed up, it was super interesting because no one knew who we were.
Right.
They didn't really understand. No one was doing deflection testing on site. And what we did is we tested the paddles, but it didn't count to eliminate paddles.
Okay.
We just wanted to collect data.
Right.
Because remember, our initial data set is all of these paddles that we bought that were being used. We
Okay.
wanted to get a baseline of what the pros were showing up with to play with
Right.
before we were ready to say this is the this is the limit. This is where we're setting the maximum or minimum ADF.
Right.
So
Okay.
that was the first testing. Seems like a long time ago, but it wasn't so long ago.
Right.
March 2023.
Oh. So the first ever testing period was done in Daytona Beach. That was actually my first tournament a couple years ago, actually.
How
Yeah.
do you do? How do you do?
My events actually got canceled because of the rain, so yeah.
Yeah, there was rain. I remember that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, lots of rain. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay, Gary. Now
We
let's
started. I
relate.
mean, let's think about this. We started our involvement in pickleball just about the exact same time.
Right. Yeah. I think I played in 2024. I think that was my first tournament.
Okay.
Yeah, so 1 year difference, not much. But it's good to see how much we've evolved and grown. That's it.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think a lot of players and spectators would like to know what happened in Cincinnati. What was the decision that removed half of the paddles or close to half the paddles from the UPA approved paddle list?
Well, you have to expect that when something's new, there's going to be an adjustment period or there's going to be some rocky types of times.
Right.
September 1st was the beginning of the official certification, and paddles had to come under the UPA certification as of September 1st.
Right.
And it's something that a year before was communicated. But think about your first time doing anything. it's not realistic, and it's very normal for when an entire industry is going through a full process for people either not to 100% understand that process or things to pop up that aren't taken into consideration. Now, I would say that given the fact that it was the paddle companies and our first time with certification, everything went, I think, even much better than we expected
Okay.
because we had full compliance. People got their paddles in on time.
Okay.
I'm proud to say in 2025, our first full year of paddle testing, we were not late with one test,
That's
which is
good.
great. I mean, I'm not patting ourselves on the back, but that's a fact. We were not late with any tests.
That's good.
So, I chalk it up to like education and understanding what needs to be done in a timely manner. And, what I told everyone, who's kind of struggling, when people are struggling, like, what is this test?
Right.
We have white papers, we're as transparent as possible, but people are busy. And, you have to have the right people working who do quality control, and you have to have the right, equipment to test, and the factories have to be in line. Given the relatively short amount of time that UPAA has had certification, I I honestly did not think that things would go as smoothly as they had, given the monumental task of brand new dynamic testing that's never been done before. I mean, I have to hand it to the paddle companies. They've been very supportive. They've been very proactive. And, the paddles that we're eliminating, people are pretty much saying, yeah, that's a really spinny paddle, or yeah, that's a super powerful paddle. We're regulating and we are eliminating paddles. And I think that's necessary because UPA wants to set a speed and spin limit to protect the game.
All right. Thank you, Gary. So the future is looking brighter and brighter for paddle development. What are some upcoming brands that we can expect that are developing the next generation? I know you know some. Come on.
Well, I mean, look, I would tell you, and it's not a political answer, there are no bad paddles now. Everyone who's in business is making a high quality paddle,
Right.
high performance paddle. I mean, if you look at paddles 3 years ago versus now,
Not much of a difference.
paddle, it's amazing. It's really amazing.
Okay.
And I don't know what the next great breakthrough will be, but I could tell you there isn't one. There are many, many paddle companies that are moving forward with new materials
Okay.
or new construction, and it keeps us on our toes. And also, it's very exciting. I'm not sure, but I think like 2 years ago, EVA foam, and I don't even know if it was allowed under,
Right.
the, you know, but now foam is a huge buzzword.
Right.
I mean, and I think that, look, you could have buzzwords, people could talk about things, but what I'm excited about is when I hear people review these new paddles, they're like, wow, these are great paddles.
Right. No, it's very good to hear. And
Yeah,
it's
and you know what's exciting for me also? Like if there's a paddle company that like had a hit a couple of years ago,
okay.
and then they come up with a brand new hit,
Right.
and all of a sudden everyone like they're the buzz. I
Right.
think there's a tremendous amount of excitement about the newness.
Right.
And that, look, it keeps us on our toes, but also I think it's great for people who love the sport
Right.
because, like, playing with a new paddle could be a lot of fun.
Right. I think
I,
like adding on to what you said, like there are some brands like Adidas, Engage that had a paddle long ago and just it really just took it to the next level. We had Adidas with the new metal bone and Engage has dropped the new paddle that lots of pros and players are, switching to and are liking it. It's good to see that
yeah,
paddles are, evolving and taking the next step into creating the next best thing.
yeah, the paddle companies are not resting on their
Right.
laurels. I would say it's a group of dynamic people that are really always looking for the next thing.
Right.
And what I love about pickleball is like you meet people who play with a paddle And in some ways, like the paddle's an extension of their personality.
Right. I mean, like, right, like, no, that's actually a really good way of putting it. Like, you have a gearbox that, for people who want to hit hard, right? And then you have paddles that are soft and just paddles that are just, that look good. It's just really nice to see in the community.
Yeah, it doesn't exist as much, I don't think, in tennis.
Right. No, no, tennis are just the same kind of rackets. They just look a little bit
Well,
different.
no, I think the technology's there.
Right,
And look, I started playing tennis, I'm 60 years old.
right,
And I started playing tennis in the 70s. My first tennis racket was a Jack Kramer
right.
wood racket.
Wow.
And
Yeah,
if you were to use a racket like that, I mean, you'd probably end up, injuring your arm. Like people don't
right,
use that. But there's certain innovations in tennis, like when Prince came along with, the larger face
right,
rackets. That was amazing. That changed the game a lot. And then, fiberglass and all of the different composites, tennis rackets lighter, more flexible or stiffer. It just really has changed the game. And some people could argue, oh, the men's game, is it too much just like first serve and just, banging
right.
versus, in the 80s and 70s, you had artists, who were like John McEnroe. Um, and that type of game doesn't exist now. Everything's more power, but certainly tennis is more fun as a general statement because of the paddles. And I truly believe that pickleball, could accomplish the same thing
Right.
without becoming too fast, without too much spin that changes the game to just like pop tennis or mini tennis. You don't want that, but like touch and like resets and dinks and you know technology. It's not with the paddles. You talk about feel, and there are a lot of attributes that people talk about and the podcasters talk about with pickleball, and people really love it. I mean, these podcasters are pretty new, and they have pretty big audiences and loyal.
No, no, yeah, it's good. I know we have like the pickleballers from the Kitchen Pickleball, and there's a lot of like small podcasts too that that take a paddle and they post videos and reviews and everything. So it's really
Yeah,
good.
I know you're doing the interview, but I have a question for you. Is
Yes,
it
yes,
fair
shoot.
to say, I mean, you're 13 years old, right?
No. 14.
14, that you represent
I'm sorry, what?
you represent a new player who perhaps spent as much time playing pickleball as tennis. I know you have somewhat of a tennis
Right,
background,
yeah.
but at this point in your life, would you say pickleball has been the dominant sport that you've played?
Um, I think I was definitely better at pickleball than I am at tennis right now. But
You a competitive tennis player? Did you play in tournaments? And
yes, yeah, yeah. I played a lot of tournaments. I was number one in the Eastern Division, and it was tennis was literally my entire life. The practices and everything. Played on a bunch of like teams and traveled all over the place. But nothing could compare to what we have done with pickleball. I mean, the community and just these tournaments, like Dallas was just such a beautiful event. Just the community is just so awesome. While at a tournament, at a tennis tournament, it's so quiet and everybody's so hungry to win, and it just doesn't have any emotion or any like confidence, enjoyment to play and have fun with other people. You know.
yeah, no, I feel that too. But I guess my specific question is, are you seeing people that you compete? I think are you number one in the world or
Yeah, it's top three, top three.
you're top three?
Yeah.
Are there any top 10 players that you compete with that never play tennis?
Yes, yep. Though there's definitely a bunch, and we can even take Anna Leigh Waters, for example. She has no tennis background. And
I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
yeah, she came from soccer. Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
think that if someone's not from the tennis world and you're competing with them, do you notice differences or
Um,
at your level?
at my level, I mean, form is a really big thing, and you could see it sometimes, right? I mean, there's some players, that came from baseball, that are just super fast, and, cover everything, and just there's a lot of like stuff like I played a couple of ping pong players, and you could just see their volleys and their flicks and everything. It's just this something that other people just can't compete with.
Yeah, I think it'll be exciting when these young players that very much grew up playing just pickleball to see how they change the game.
Right.
Because I
But
believe in the pro ranks, most pros have some type of tennis
yes,
background.
yeah, yeah,
A lot
yeah.
of
We have like Connor Garnett, top three singles player, big college tennis player.
Guinea
Right,
George,
Christopher Hayworth, top
yeah,
top player. But I think tennis just gives the biggest and the best advantage in singles. And that's just something that a player that might have 2 more years of experience on them, a tennis player can come out and beat them, right? Just because of their strokes, their movement, all their shots and everything like that.
yeah. I would say I could tell you quick. I mean, I don't know if you asked me this question, but something I want to share.
Right.
Um, like so, I'm 60 years old, and I'm
Right.
kind of towards the end of my career, and like whatever I was gonna do, I wanted it to be something that's impactful in a sport that I want to do something impactful in a sport that's impactful.
Right.
And what really convinced me that pickleball is something special is I was at my country club and I saw this lady, she's maybe 70 years old, and she's talking about how much she loves pickleball. And I don't want to mention the name of the paddle, but she's like, oh, and this paddle's terrific.
All right, Gary. Final question here. What is your paddle of choice?
It's interesting. So when we get paddles, we have to keep a certain amount of paddles.
All right.
And of course, on site, when we do testing, if a paddle fails, very often we get a paddle to study it, so on and so forth.
Right.
I used to be very excited about that.
Right.
But now that we're a governing body, everything we do has to be by the book.
Okay.
So literally, I don't even want to use a paddle
Okay.
that has a name on it. I'll
Okay.
use a blacked out paddle
Okay.
and they hand me a paddle. Because every paddle we have, we keep for specific purposes.
Right.
And every paddle company we have to treat the same way. So I think there's gambling in pickleball. I'll never be able to gamble.
Right.
There are many things going on with paddle companies, investments, and different. I'll never be able to make any investment or do anything with a paddle company. As a third party independent lab, everything we do, we think about, it's going to be scrutinized. The decisions that we make and the procedures we do are very important. So in many ways, I'm agnostic. I wish my game were good enough that there's a paddle that would make such a difference
Right.
for me. But like I said, all the paddles are really good paddles.
Right.
I mean, if you take a look at 2 years ago versus now, it's incredible. And I think that, with the interest in the game and the amateur game growing and the pro game growing in attendance, I think it'll continue to have like tremendous breakthroughs in performance.
Right.
And
No, I definitely agree with you.
yeah, and it's fun. I like to use different things because
Right.
paddles are, one has more power, one has more spin, one I like the touch and the sweet spot. It's kind of like you have to use it. And I don't know how I would describe a paddle that is like the perfect paddle for me, but it's kind of like you play with it and you just know it. I mean, that's what I think.
Yep.
It's a very personal decision. Everyone's different and everyone has different strategies and strength and speed and technique. And that makes it an interesting game.
Right. All right, Gary. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Sam. You're terrific. You're
Thank
terrific anytime.
thank you.
Okay,
All right,
bye.
everyone. I'm your
Bye.
host, Dan Lebo. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Ins and Outs of Pickleball. See you guys next time.